I admit it, gear is addictive. You buy something and you tell yourself, this is all I need. And once the dominoes start falling, it feels like it just will never stop. But is gear acquisition really a bad thing? Could it help you boost your career? Or is it more of a liability? This is a hot topic that Anthony and I break down in this episode, as we are both big gearheads who spent years building out our kits. So the question is, do we regret it? So welcome to the Applebox Podcast. My name is Daniel Lau, and I'm your host, and I'm sitting along the man of the hour, the co-host, Anthony Voltsinis. Let's get into it. Okay, welcome to another episode of Applebox Podcast. Here again with my co-host, Anthony Voltsinis. We're going to talk about money management in this industry, and more so about gear acquisition, because that is a very, very big common thing where, you know, especially when you're starting out in this industry, a lot of people like to own their own gear. Now I know there's that counter argument of just rent everything, but I think when you're starting out and you're not at that level where you're hired on for big projects, it's a little easier said than done. We're going to talk a little bit about convincing clients to even rent gear and how difficult that can be versus actually owning your own gear and getting enough. At what point is it too much at this point where you're owning a little bit too much and you're spending a little bit too much? So let's talk about gear acquisition. Me and Anthony are both two people who've owned our own gear at this point. You have a production truck at this point, like a mini production truck. Let's just go right into the question. What do you think about owning gear? What is your opinion about owning gear as a filmmaker?
Yeah, so I mean, starting off as a freelancer, you need to own the gear.
Yeah.
You know, and oftentimes when you're early stage as a freelancer, you get hired because you own the gear as well as the skill set to use the gear.
Fair.
So when I was coming up, like the only way I could shoot was to have my own stuff to shoot with. You know, so I had to get a camera, I had to get lenses, I had to get audio gear, I had to get lighting, whatever. So it was just by habit and by necessity. In order to shoot, in order to do a job, in order to even just create for fun, I need to have my own stuff. And I think as someone who's like passionate about this industry, like that's what you want to do. Like, you want to have your own thing, your own tools, and your own little toys to play with.
Yeah.
And you keep building up as you need more stuff to do your job. But I definitely do think it reaches a point where you don't need more. And when you get to that stage, when you need more tools and more toys, you should be renting, probably.
Yeah.
But you know, like you said, there's a lot of factors involved. It's can you pitch to clients that you need this for your productions? You know, what's the value in the gear long term outside of just being used for jobs?
Yeah, and I think like as a videographer, you know, for videographers, you need to own gear. Let's just make this really straight to the point where if you're in the commercial world and you're being hired as a director or a cinematographer, you don't need gear. Straight, simple, right? But as videographers, as filmmakers, I think you're right. When you first start off, you need to have that gear. If you don't have that gear, you can't really practice your craft. And ultimately, you need to practice your craft in this. Now, in terms of what kind of gear should you own at the beginning, I think there's an argument to made on both sides about like some people wanting to own, say, an FX6 versus having an A7S III or an FX3 in this case. Like, what's the difference, right, at that point when you're owning that type of level of gear? I think if you're going to go to FX6, you have to have the budget that supports that. So if your clients, in one ways, is giving enough budget to do that, so where you can own, where you can pretty much afford to own an FX6 or own a C300 or own something along the lines of that, or an Ursa, then great, right? If you want to go down that route, it makes sense. But in a lot of ways, at the same time, it doesn't really, unless you need the tools to do it. Like you need the ports or you need whatever, the ergonomics, right? In order, you want to work in that world, then that's great. I think if you get to the point where you're thinking that if you get an FX6 versus an FX3, that you're going to create better content, that's where I think you're sorely mistaken, because when you're in the videography world, I truly believe that customer experience is more important than the quality of work. Once you hit a certain quality of work.
Yeah.
So if you hit a certain standard where you're good and you're good enough to get paid to do what you do, then the FX6 is not going to make any difference to you whatsoever than an FX3. Again, it's only if you need the ports and the ergonomics, right? But at the end of the day, is that really worth it? That kind of price, at that price point, you're not going to get better because you got a better camera. And you're not going to get better because you decide to go get better lenses. Like you're going to get a different look, sure, like better quality work perhaps, but should you be focusing more on customer experience and perhaps using that as budget towards marketing or perhaps lifestyle, right? I think at that point, it's a diminishing return. But if you want to be something specialized, so let's say you want to be a cinematographer, then you should be investing in things like lighting. You should be investing in things that help you practice your craft. Now, do you need a Stereotitans and M40s? No, right? But understand how to use those things and understand what the tools do. If you're not fortunate enough to be able to go on set and say mentor off a commercial DP, someone who's repped, right? And you can't learn that way and you got to learn on your own, which most DPs do, then you should get yourself those tools to understand what they do so you can use them in practice. But do it for you. Don't get caught up in the idea that this is for the client, because although you might be getting better work, especially with lighting, because it's a big difference, but if you do get caught up in the whole thing of like, this is for my client, then you're going to start to realize that like the client almost can't even tell the difference and they almost don't care. Even if they see it, they're like, oh, that's cool. They might not notice a difference. Most of the time they won't. Right. So when it comes to actually owning gear, I think it needs to be investment into what you do, not an investment into the people that you work for or that you work with in this particular case. And so that's where the money kind of like, you know, how do you manage that money? Where do you allocate that money towards? If you want to be a director or you want to be, an editor, don't buy lights. What do you need lights for?
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense. That's easy. That's an easy easy way to differentiate like how to allocate your money or whatever financial support that you have into different assets, I guess. It is tricky though, because like you kind of battle like the artist in you,
right,
and then the business person in you, because like at least from my perspective, there is an addiction to gear acquisition.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, I can afford this. I want to have this toy in my toolkit, you know?
Status almost.
Yeah, it's like status. It's also like, I can shoot this on an R5, but I have a C500 Mark II. You know, like I'd rather shoot C500 Mark II. You know, it's like it's something I think physical about the interaction with the gear. Like you can build up an FX3. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I think it is an internal status thing in some ways too. It's like, okay, I have this camera now.
There is an advantage in obviously the cinema line versus say a mirrorless line. Obviously,
yeah.
As a DP, you notice these things, and of course it's mostly workflow. But when you start looking at like the jump between, let's say, what's a Canon R5 versus say a C500. A C500 is a different sensor, and obviously in the quality of things, yes, you're going to notice that type of stuff. As an artist, you're going to notice that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But unless you're in that world where you're using, you're hiring colorists and you're hiring specialty members, like it really, as a general videographer, it's not going to really get you anything.
No, like you said, there's a point where there's a law of diminishing returns where this kit that you have will suffice.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to camera.
Yes, camera is the least important, I almost find.
Yeah, like lighting wise, you can definitely invest into the right kit.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Godox lights, you're not going to last with those.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
They have like quality control issues, at least in my experience with them.
Yeah.
But if that's all you can afford before you can get aperture lights,
for sure,
you should definitely take that step. But you can't expect to sustain a long-term business constantly buying Godox lights, in my opinion, to keep, you know what I mean? Especially if you want to be a cinematographer, right? You have to kind of experience different kinds of lights and understand that like the workflow in which like you work with in these lights are going to matter.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's actually huge in terms of like, and we're going to get into it when we really talk about cinematography, but like how the workflow goes on set, safety to efficiency to reliability. These are all things that almost matter more than all the stats you see on the paper.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's where the big brands come in. That's the difference between big brands and small brands. But if you're just starting out, that's definitely something you should start doing. I still feel that like you should buy to what your strong suits are. So if you're a good editor and you realize, you gotta be honest with yourself. I know every videographer out there thinks they're good at everything. I get it. I know, right? Like I was like that too. But pick what's that one thing that makes you stand out more than anybody? Invest into that. Because there's a high chance that that's what's going to get you more business. So if you're an editor, if your editing is off the chain and you're really good at editing, buy a great computer. Because now you can spend more efficient time in front of the computer editing, getting better content out there, right? If your lighting is what stands out, then buy more lights.
Yeah.
You know, and then learn how to color, right? And it's like, it depends on which direction you really want to go at the end of the day. But is gear important? And that's one thing I want to clarify. Yes, I think, and this is our next topic, is gear important? I really can't stand when people say gear is not important.
Yeah. It's
because I think that is ignorant to say that gear is not important.
Who's saying that though?
Well, you hear that all the time. Every YouTube video out there is talking about how gear is not important. And it doesn't matter what you have, just shoot with it. I agree in principle.
Yeah, in
with
principle,
that.
yes.
But like at the end of the day, like to say gear is not important, and there's so many topics about this too. A lot of people are just like, you know, well, at my I'm not going to name any names, but the amount of people I've talked to is like, well, my Godox does the same thing, or my aperture does the same thing, or my this and that does the same thing as this. Like, why do I need all that? And I think that just speaks to your experience level at that point. If you don't know what the advantages of something, that what it does for you, then you're just not at that level. Meaning you just obviously don't see the advantages of it.
You don't see the value in it. Yeah. I agree. I think you either get stuck in like what I have is fine.
Yeah.
And that's usually the complacent videographer. They pull up to a wedding with fucking tripod with wheels, and they're 60 years old, and they've been running the business, which I've experienced. Or you're trying to, like, if you're really into this as like a videographer, and usually the videographers who are into this want to become cinematographers eventually, and they usually do. Yeah. Is that you kind of obsess about the gear because you want to know what's capable, what everything is capable of, and what you can pull off. And you realize that at the higher end, you're not pulling up with a 300D Mark II necessarily. You know what I mean? Like you can only achieve so much with what you have, and there is like you always talk about, like the 2% difference in everything. Yeah, that can change the entire workflow on set. Right. So I agree. Like it is very YouTube-y to say like gear doesn't matter, and shoot with can lights and go like Film Riot 10 years ago. Yeah. But that's for people who are just literally broke, starting out, and you don't have the money, but they want to encourage you to create. Yeah. And that's the point. But you need to create enough to make money to invest back into the game. Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like learning how to like use a shower curtain instead of an actual rag. I think all that stuff is like, even pros do it. Yes. But they do it not by choice. They do it as a solution. Problem solving. Yeah. It's problem solving at the end of the day. Like, oh, you don't have an extra rag. Okay, let's go grab that shower curtain. And let's just shoot it. And it teaches you to be a little bit more resourceful at the end of the day and be a better problem solver. But it just scales with time. Like you start off with like, I got to Jimmy rig this thing, and I got to use a shower curtain. I got to use whatever I have around. I got to use Vaseline on the lens. To get the look that I want. Like, but you eventually grow out of that, and you like wrap it with it. Like there's so many different. You'll like there just becomes like optional solutions for you that you kind of put in your playbook for when you need them. Yeah. And it's good to have, but they're not, you can't operate every shoot like that. And I think, especially as you get on a higher level, efficiency and resourcefulness is more important than almost everything. It is everything. It's kind of like directing is like your vision is necessity, but what actually gets the vision done is actually communication.
and being a good communicator. So like, it's the same thing with DPs and cinematography. Like it's all about efficiency, right?
Yeah.
But and workflow. But yeah, when it comes to gear, like I know the ideal like format would be to rent everything. Everyone's like, well, it's cheaper to rent, And it is in the short term, and it probably is the smartest thing. But do you know how difficult it is as a videographer, not as a producer for big commercials that are 6 figures and above? I'm talking like videographer, to actually convince your client to rent.
Yeah, you're not gonna get it.
You're not gonna get that,
Not
right? Like it's just not realistic, right? Like you can sit there and say, well, all I need is this, and like I'll just rent everything. I don't think that's realistic. I think when you're also renting, you're not taking in consideration that you don't just say, I want to rent a 1200D, aperture 1200D, and it just appears at your house. Like you got to deal with insurance. You got to go pick it up. You got to drop it off. You got to deal with all that kind of stuff. And if you're a very busy videographer, I don't think it's not realistic. It's not a realistic lifestyle.
I don't think videography, like on the mid to lower end, you can justify rentals at all.
Yeah.
You need to have your own kit. And that's what makes you a videographer, is like you own the stuff that you shoot with, and you can run and gun and do your thing with
everything
your stuff.
that you need to do.
Yeah, it's like almost you are your kit, and your kit is you, and like it's a package.
Yeah.
But everyone talks about it. Once you're a cinematographer, you don't even own anything at a certain level, right? Because you don't need to, unless you want to run a rental business, which a lot of people do now,
or you want to add it to your kit fees.
Yeah, exactly.
And you have that relationship.
Yeah. So, but I think. I don't know. I don't really have advice on this. It's like, when you kind of know. I guess some people do get stuck in like, oh, what I have is fine, but they don't really progress.
Well, I think there's also like, how do you balance between buying gear and and living, and
that's also true.
Feeding your lifestyle or relationships is really tough as well. Like being able to bring your girlfriend out or boyfriend out or whatever every single week or something to go out for a date night or something, like managing money in general and how much gear you should get, and that's very difficult. It's something that I experienced that I was just like, how do you balance between the both? And I always say, when you're a videographer, it gets to the point where, look, if you can go out, you can get a high quality image, you can shoot all day. So meaning you have enough batteries, you have enough whatever you need to shoot all day, whatever it is. You have an editing machine that can efficiently work, and you have a small lighting kit with the necessary camera accessories like tripod, gimbal.
Exactly. You're done.
I think you're done.
You are done.
You that's all you need.
Yeah. Also because you realize, like, if you have this many lights, let's say, okay, well, I'm investing into lighting. Who's gonna fucking run that stuff?
Yeah.
Like, we're gonna store it, and you need a van like me.
You need storage space like this.
Yeah. You're gonna slam your Volkswagen Golf's rear windshield and crack the entire thing, and it's gonna be held together by tint by 20 million pieces.
Yeah.
And you realize, oh, I have a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think you just know, but there is a point where like what you have will service who you service.
Yeah. And the next level of gear acquisition is how to turn it into an asset.
Yeah.
Right? Gear, just like everything else, can turn into liability. There's certain gear that, like, I would say aren't really assets. They just help you. For example, clamps.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you want to go and you want to rig things, I get it. But no one's going to go and rent your clamps.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it makes no sense. But an asset could be lenses, or it could be cameras. And a lot of times it's something we discuss internally between us is like turning your investment, which is, it is an investment at the end of the day, into assets, meaning either you incorporate it into your price or you rent it out.
Yes.
Right? And that, or you use it to create things like specs that then can land you the money that essentially makes up for all the money that you've spent on the gear. You need some way to return the investment back and turning it into asset. If you buy something strictly just to use them to continue to do $500 gigs, you are depreciating, and it's really not helpful at all. You end up getting this and you're like realizing, I could have done this whole time with a Pocket 4K.
Yeah.
Why did I need an Ursa?
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, so that's like the next level of, like, when you get to that point, when you're gathering so much gear, that's something to think about. If you're somebody who needs to buy gear and you have the luxury of doing so because maybe you make a lot of money or you come from a lot of money and you just enjoy doing it, you know, then of course you can just buy whatever you want. But something you want to think about when it comes to buying gear is just all the supporting factors that go with everything. Like, you can't buy a camera without a tripod, right? Like you can't buy a camera without a lens, without a cage, without all the things that you need to function. Same with lights, right? You need the supporting thing. You need a Fresnel for your light. You need a stand, whether it's combo or C-stand. There's other things to think about when you buy gear. And I think when you get to that stage where you start making money, it's very easy to sit there and just be like, oh, I have, $5,000. I want a 1200D. And then you spend $5,000 on 1200D and realize you can't use it because you can't put on your C-stand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a domino effect. It's a minefield buying gear.
Absolutely.
Once you unlock one, then you realize everything else you've bought before is like could be obsolete.
Yeah.
Like, oh shit. Like it's when I got the C500.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, I have the C500 now. And then eventually the C300 came in by accident. And it's like, okay, I have two camera bodies. Now I need to build these out. I need V mounts. I need $2,000 memory cards. I need, every little thing to make this a workable
functional
camera.
Item. Yeah.
Otherwise it's like, I'm not going to put this on a little Manfrotto tripod,
Yeah.
I need to, it affects like once you get to a certain level, one piece of kit can like literally render 20% of your other gear obsolete.
Absolutely, yeah. It changes everything. Like the Steras, the fucking charging cables, $100 for 8 charging cables.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Like, what is that? You know what I mean? Like, it's ridiculous. So,
yeah,
gear acquisition is a dangerous game. It's fun. I get it. It's addictive. But, if I was one thing I would say people could take away from this episode is just try to distinguish what you want to be.
Exactly.
If you can run your business right now, you're shooting weddings and you're making $2,000 a wedding or whatever it is you're making, and you're happy with that, getting a better camera is not going to change that price tag.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you want to be a cinematographer, then you need lights. You need experience with lights, and you need to go invest in that. So don't go start buying anamorphic lenses and spending your money on a hell of expensive camera body. When camera really, at the end of the day, the camera's so good these days at the mirrorless level. Just get a mirrorless, get lights.
Yeah.
Get experience with lights and
More
understand
practice,
the concept. More practice than anything. And I think you do that, and if you want to buy gear, I think you just limit yourself to where you just realize, you know what? The minuscule changes are just workflow changes. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, they're just workflow changes, meaning it's a little easier to grade or it's a little easier to do this. That doesn't make you more money. It only makes you more money if you can translate the time that you save from your old workflow to then acquire new clients. That's it. If you're very good at being able to translate made up time from what you gain from workflow, then great. Go out and do that. Sure, it makes sense. But if it gets to the point where you're just, doing it because you think that because you can grade 422 versus 8-bit, 10-bit versus 8-bit, and you think a 10-bit will be so much prettier and people are going to recognize it, they're not going to recognize it, and you're not going to get more money for that.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not a colorist, right? So at the end of the day, unless you want to be a colorist, but like you're not a colorist. So at the end of the day, don't go start spending $2,000 extra just to get something that really doesn't mean much, especially in the climate these days with content and social. Like people making stuff on cell phones, and then it's crazy what they can do with it. So
Exactly.
So yeah, hopefully that helped. And any other thing you want to say about gear?
Not really.
Sick.
Yeah.